Alright, everybody, today we're going to talk about containment. And this is sort of a broad topic, and we're going to cover a lot of different things. But the big takeaway here is that we are trying to stop the spread of communism. That is our number one goal here. But before we get into the nitty gritty of this, let's do a quick recap. So, the Truman Doctrine dictated that the U.S. would provide aid to countries that were in danger of flipping to communism. This was the rationale behind giving aid to Greece and Turkey. We didn't want them to flip to communism. And it was the same motivation behind the Marshall Plan. NATO was also formed as a way to prevent further spread of communism, and this was, collective defense, things like that. But that is where we are right now. There are two sides in this war, and we do not want communism to spread. Okay, now let's get into it. First up, containment policy. This was coined by George F. Kennan in 1947, and it sought to freeze communism where it was, right? No further expansion. It was created as a way to push against communism without military action. Remember, we are still not far from World War II, and we don't want another war. And this is detailed a little bit more in the NSC 68 plan, and we're going to get to that in just a little bit, but more on that later. The Soviets thought that they could do no wrong. They thought that they were just the big kahuna in the East. And, Kennan knew that neither diplomacy nor military action against the Soviets would work. And guys, this becomes the basis of our foreign policy just in general until the late 80s. This is the Cold War, stopping the spread of communism. It shouldn't come as a surprise, then, that the fall of China to communists really freaked people out. So in 1949, the nationalist government in China fell to communists in a revolution led by Mao Zedong, and we'll talk more about him a little bit later. Not in this video, but in the unit. And China then became friendly with the USSR both militarily and economically. Like I said, this set off major alarms in the West, and by the West I mean America and Western Europe. See, this picture is a great representation of what people thought communist China was going to lead to. We thought they would get their little communist tentacles all up in everybody's business, and we didn't want any part of that. So, what do we do in response? We adopt brinkmanship. Rather, Eisenhower really leaned into brinkmanship. Eisenhower was willing to be aggressive with the Soviets. Remember, he was a general after all, so he wasn't afraid to, get a little bit dirty. He would even threaten them with nuclear war. You can see the happiest man ever, John Foster Dulles up there, summing this up really well. He said that brinkmanship is the ability to get to the verge without getting into war is necessary, right? If you are scared to go to the brink, you are lost. Going hand in hand with that is Eisenhower's New Look program. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of this, it was a kind of revamping of the military spending and financial plan for the military. Don't worry about that. What you got to worry about is that this came with an entirely new focus on nuclear weapons, right? So it shifted spending away from conventional military forces, and money was now spent on air dominance, long-range bombers like B-47s, B-52s. There's a B-52 in the corner right there. And, the motive behind this was that, well, why would we waste money on building up a conventional force, tanks, guns, regular bombs, that kind of stuff, when we can just have the ability to nuke anyone and then scare them out of disagreeing with us. Right, but some believe that this was not the wisest strategy because, when you put all of your eggs in the nuclear war basket, that leaves you without the ability to do things that aren't nuclear war, right? Not everything has to be a nuclear war. Sometimes limited military engagement's the way to go. And when you structure your military like this, it makes that kind of stuff difficult. Under this program, we also dabbled in tactical nuclear weapons. These are small, highly portable, and able to strike small targets. A lot of these were fired out of cannons, dropped from smaller planes, off of trucks, like rockets. None of these were ever used, though, because when you think about it, it doesn't really make sense. The whole point of having a nuclear weapon is that it's big, right? So if you need a smaller bomb, how about you just use a regular bomb and not spread radiation everywhere? It's a little bit deeper than that, but yeah, these were kind of useless and we never used them. Next up, let's talk about the Eisenhower Doctrine. So under this doctrine, a country could request American economic assistance and or aid from the U.S. military if it was being threatened by armed aggression from another state. The focus here was on the Middle East, and as you can see from that map, the countries in red are those that were aimed at, in the Eisenhower Doctrine. And we're going to come back to the Middle East in a little bit, so keep this in your back pocket. Next, I want to take a second to talk about the military-industrial complex. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to do with containment policy, but it's something that Eisenhower warned about. So, Eisenhower's a former military general, right? So he knows his way around how the military works. And during his farewell address, he cautioned against too much of a business alliance between the military and defense industry that supplies the military. Meaning, if the defense contractors are too, cozy with the military, the government will continue to find excuses for war. Why would this happen? Well, because the suppliers will lobby the government to buy more weapons and thus make more money, and then they gotta use the weapons, right? So you gotta start a war. And then the defense industry needs more weapons to start the war, and then the defense industry lobbies for Congress, and so on and so forth. Basically, it's the plot of Iron Man 1. Back to foreign policy. So now I want to talk about Kennedy's flexible response. So this avoided resorting to nuclear weapons. A wise decision, if you ask me. And it allowed for more/different options for responding to communist threats, like limited engagements, diplomacy, etc. But he wasn't afraid to be bold, though. This is another one that we're going to come back to later, so stick this in your back pocket too, and stay tuned. So now let's talk about Johnson's domino theory. So this one's pretty straightforward. This pretty much meant that losing one nation to communists would lead to the loss of others in the region, right? So, you want to stop the first domino, and the rest would be protected from falling. And finally, let's talk about Nixon. Specifically, let's talk about détente and realpolitik. So, détente is a relaxation of tensions between two nations, in this case between the US and the USSR. This is a change from aggressive policies like Eisenhower, right? So pretty much all we want to do is get along during détente. And look at the picture right there. Perfectly illustrates that. You got an eagle and a bear. Seems as though they've had a child together. They're getting along great. Nice little family. On a similar note, there was a realpolitik, right? This is from the Germans, or at least the words German. And it means that the U.S. will deal with nations as individuals and depending on circumstances rather than ideology or belief-based. Basically, it means that just because you're a communist doesn't mean we won't work with you. Okay, so containment. Again, this was a broad list of topics and terms that we covered today. But, across all of what we talked about, you'll notice that none of these policies dealt with shrinking the Soviets' influence. We weren't going into countries that were already communist and liberating them, right? All we were talking about today is stopping communism where it was. We freeze it where it is. We don't want it to expand. And that concept, guys, is pretty much the backbone for this entire unit on the Cold War. We don't want communism to spread. That is the core concept, the motive behind a lot of what we do throughout the rest of this unit. So keep that in mind as we move forward. That's the end of this video. Have a good day. Bye.